I wanted to start off actually with, if one of you would be up for doing it, describing what is the difference between the metaverse and virtual worlds in that sense and blockchain gaming, because often they're conflated, and it'd be good to kind of understand the difference between the two, if any of you want to take a stab at it first.
Yeah, so it's possible, I suppose, to imagine a blockchain game that isn't a metaverse, especially if that blockchain game doesn't really create a shared space. So I think the concept of a metaverse being a digital space in which people are coming together and interacting with each other, query how immersive that has to be, for example, at the graphical layer. But that quality of it being a single space where people are coming together, I think, is probably definitional to a metaverse. And some blockchain games perhaps don't really contain any element that would bring people together within a space in that way. So one kind of prototypical thing that's emerged to define that has been the concept of land. So land within a game would probably help to promote the concept of that game being a metaverse, but it doesn't have to involve land. I think it could also just involve tokens, so tokenizing enough elements of the system that are co-owned and around which people are coalescing. But yeah, I don't think every blockchain game is a metaverse.
Yeah, because so your game, Alien Worlds, is the most played blockchain game space at the moment. But also I think something you kind of picked up on there is about the financialization of gaming, and we've spoken previously about how not every blockchain game takes that the same way. William, you obviously run the blockchain that Alien Worlds is based on, Wax. How do you kind of see the financialization of gaming evolving, particularly in the blockchain space?
Well, it's been around for a long time, since my partner and I were doing the trading of skins. So skins are video game virtual items, and those were used in much the same way that kind of other blockchain-based tokens are used now. That started in the late 90s. Once you could trade an in-game item, very quickly, guys like us and others decided to create marketplaces to allow people to trade those for fiat. And so that's been going on for over 20 years. People buying or basically trading their work, right? So having to do certain activities to earn virtual items in a game, and then going to people who have less time but more money and selling them to them. Many of the early people in that industry, in the video game virtual item trading industry, went into crypto. And the main reason was because something Web3 or Metaverse promises, which is a permissionless environment. And so from my perspective, that's fundamental to anything we call a metaverse. It would be why something that Meta or Facebook is doing would, in my mind, probably never be a real metaverse, because they are never going to allow open permissionless software development to do whatever you want to do. And the reason they won't allow it is because it would not conform with their business model. Because ultimately, the first thing you would do is try to figure out a way to not pay the platform operator, which in this case would be Facebook. So metaverses that are controlled by one entity that has a prevailing business model that extracts value in some particular way, in my mind, wouldn't be a metaverse. But certainly it's almost a nonsense word now, because everyone you ask has a different definition of what it means.
And kind of picking up on that as well about like permissionless versus permissioned blockchains and these games. Kevin, I know at Atmos Labs you're thinking about this a lot, the idea of interoperability between games. That is definitely one of the biggest stumbling points for trying to encourage more traditional game studios to get into blockchain gaming, is how do you foster this idea of interoperability and being able to take something from one game to another?
Interoperability is one of those really, really hard problems that we talk about a lot and we throw the word around, but it's fundamentally really difficult to do, right? Just thinking about an art asset at sort of a baseline, right? Like what something looks like in a virtual world that gets built by one company is or should look completely differently. Now, when you extend that idea to the attributes that that asset has, right, there's no way that a sword in one game should function exactly the same in another. Now, that doesn't mean that interoperability can't exist or can't work, but what we're talking about really is this, like, should I be able to have asset portability in the sense of, can I show off, or can my digital identity be representative as I move from one of these interconnected virtual worlds? And backing up just a split second to this idea of the metaverse, right? The metaverse is really just the next evolution of the internet. It's really a series of interconnected digital worlds. And so our ability to move assets, blockchain is what facilitates that, and that is fundamental to its existence. And so again, interoperability, you're never going to have one-to-one parity in terms of interoperability, where one asset in one world is exactly the same as it is somewhere else. But if somebody owns a Bored Ape and they want to show that off in a different game, that's part of their identity. That's something that is not only doable today, it should be the kind of portability that we're building towards.
But something that we've seen so far as well is that a lot of this portability is being explored through bridges, which are basically platforms that you can move assets from one to the other, whether that's crypto, whether that's something else, just to kind of make everything work a bit more cohesively together. And Sarah, we've spoken about this before, but the security aspect on those bridges has come under fire this year. We've seen a lot of hacks happen on these bridges. It's what took down Axie Infinity's platform for quite a while earlier this year. That's another big blockchain game. How do you see that space evolving in a way that you might be able to achieve interoperability without those security flaws?
Yeah, so the issue there is insufficient decentralization, or kind of inadequate execution of the decentralization. So in a couple of those well-known examples, there have been decentralized bridging, like Oracle systems, but more than one of the consensus nodes has been run by a single party, and so if that gets hacked, then you can achieve consensus. This is something, of course, that needs to be solved, and that as projects are developing these bridges, they need to really realize that you need to run sufficient nodes and have those not be run by a single party. I think it's worth mentioning that as a space, as kind of builders of some of the largest metaverse projects, we understand the importance of interoperability, and that really this vision of the metaverse requires there being an open quality to that, where users, and the user-centric nature of an open metaverse, in contradistinction to the kind of Web 2 platforms where the user is not kind of at the center of either the business model or really anything about it. And so some of the largest sort of metaverse projects and companies are coming together to form the Open Metaverse Alliance for Web 3. We announced this in Paris a few days ago, and we're going to be speaking about it in London again at the end of the week. And this is really where some of the large projects, so ourselves and the Sandbox, Animoca Brands, Dapper Labs, and others are coming together to form these standards that would then allow for true interoperability. And not only technical standards, but also sort of definitional, laying some concepts, in the ground, so that journalists and others can really understand, some of these topics, like, what is an open metaverse, for example. These are, we need definitions. So yeah, we're coming together to build that.
How much of this is a mission statement as well to convince traditional game studios that blockchain is something they should be looking at? Because so far we've seen a very mixed response from game studios, some really loving the idea of NFTs and wanting to put things on blockchain, and some really speaking out against it. Well, maybe you can speak to that.
I don't think any big video game company likes NFTs. I think they treat them the same way that they think about virtual items, right? They hated virtual item trading. They hated it because they felt like they were not in control. So I think NFTs are anathema to the prevailing business models of AAA video games. And I personally don't think they will ever adopt NFTs, NFTs, as we think about them. These tokens that are connected to some artifact that only the holder controls. I don't see that happening. Ubisoft last year said they were going to do, and I think they actually did do a sale. That was not an NFT. Anything that comes with pages and pages of restrictions on who can own it, how many hours you have to play the game in order to even buy it, where you can buy it. So that was more of a marketing thing. And video gamers, I would say, most video gamers do not like NFTs. Just like they don't like virtual item trading. Go to any Reddit forum around item trading, and it's just vitriol. So this is why I think what you'll have is you'll have native blockchain video game people. And those people will embrace it because that's what they want as a core part of the game. Traditional gamers, I don't see it happening. It could, but I think it'll take a lot longer for them to do it.
Does anyone disagree with that?
Well, I think largely I agree, at least with the sentiment today, right? The traditional gamers largely dislike NFTs. There's a big chasm that has to be crossed there. I think that, and I also agree with William in that big game studios aren't going to come into the space, at least not in a meaningful way in the near term, because NFTs and the idea of, essentially having a free market within your game economy fundamentally breaks your game economy 99 times out of 100, right? If it's a lot harder to design a game where people are going to attribute real money to assets than it is if you control everything, right? It's a fundamentally much more complex problem. That being said, I think that chasm can be crossed. I think that you will see more gamers come over as games level up fundamentally as we build better and better products within this space, as we build more compelling games, not only from a narrative and story standpoint, but top to bottom with better economic development that are designed from the ground up, embracing these technologies, then yeah, we're going to start to close that gap.
It's important to note too that the game space is like many technologies. Every time a new platform or a new technical capability has been introduced, the incumbents take a long time or never embrace it, and a new set of companies go in and do great. From arcades to PC, from PC to handheld, handheld to console, console to mobile, mobile and Flash, then Flash, mobile went to blockchain. And every one of those transition points, the dominant companies in that market didn't embrace the new technology, and a new set of small companies or indie developers came and created huge franchises. So from a venture capital standpoint, I like it. And it also makes sense from their standpoint. If you have a multi-billion-dollar game franchise, would you port to a platform that could undermine your business model? You'd probably be hesitant. So I think they're correct in being cautious. But while they wait, companies like these and others are learning how to actually build in that environment.
And Sarah, how are you seeing the pace of adoption grow at the minute? Because we obviously had a major takeoff in a lot of the blockchain games, especially last year. But this year, if we look at the latest data coming from industry reports like DAB Radars, we see that kind of it's slightly plateaued. It's gone a bit stable over the last 2 quarters. So what's the kind of the pace adoption been like, and how do you see that growing or returning to growth in future?
Yeah, I think actually kind of possibly the big story there is that adoption hasn't tracked prices as closely as people who claim that the only value of playing these games is the play to earn mechanic. You would have expected to see a closer correlation, and actually that hasn't been the case. And so I think what that speaks to, perhaps it could be a number of things, but for me what I look to is community. Community is one of the stickiest layers that can exist between people. Once people feel that they're members of something together, that is something that they're willing to invest time in across cycles and across different iterations of the technology and so on. And that's really when we talk about adoption, what we're really seeing is that communities are onboarding more people and new communities are arising. And the fact that that's such a compelling part of a tokenized metaverse game, and that is such a key distinction, I think, to Web 2 versions of gaming or previous iterations as well, where obviously communities arose, because human beings will always want to meet each other, and if they share something in common, there will be a level of community that rises. But this is baked into the DNA of blockchain gaming, is that what's important about the system and ownership of the system is tokenized, and that ownership is dispersed and is widely held, and everybody is a co-owner, therefore. And then you just unleash this massive amount of innovation, right from small little Twitter competitions, around giving out NFTs, all the way up to guilds, for example, that would actually create technology around other games, and everything in between. That is a consequence of the ownership. And so adoption I see as continuing because these communities are compelling. People are co-owners of the system. They're invested, and that's what's driving the system forward.
Yeah, the play-to-earn mechanic had a flaw, and the flaw was inflation, right? These were perpetually inflated tokens that you were using your NFTs to mine or to acquire a token. That token might then be traded for something else. But the more players you have, the more that token gets mined, the more it gets sold, and without price support, it collapses. So there will need to be an alternative to that particular mechanic of mining an in-game token using NFTs. I think that people now kind of see how it's a constant downward trend on that token price. So there needs to be modifications. And those are coming, but a single new approach hasn't been developed yet.
Yeah, because just picking up on what you guys are saying there about guilds, that's a very big topic within the world of blockchain gaming right now. If we think about a game like Axie Infinity, something that was very difficult for it during this period was the fact that as the price of the NFTs required to start the game went up, traders would come in, buy these expensive NFTs, and sell them back to poorer gamers who were trying to come in and treat this as a livelihood, and then take a share of their royalties and basically creating a perpetual form of labor happening within the game. Those are obviously things that aren't new to blockchain gaming. They're
not new to the gaming.
No, but how do you, as creators of these games, try and think of ways to get around that, Kevin?
If you design a system that looks like work, it's probably work, right? Like that. At the end of the day, play to earn in its basest mechanic is you are just performing a unit of work in order to extract value, and then you have sort of infinite sell pressure, as William said. Guilds specifically, I think guilds have been around for a long time in gaming, right? Guilds have been, and fundamentally they serve a very good purpose in terms of intent, right? In that it's often a way in which a community self-organizes to solve a particular problem, right? In World of Warcraft, it was intended to be a social game, and guilds were a way in which people collaborated to perform raids in game. It's just gaming together. Now, in the case of a system where there is fundamentally value that can be extracted, did guilds potentially get a little bit exploitative? It's possible, but fundamentally,
I think that's their design. Yeah, I think the difference between a guild in WoW, World of Warcraft, versus a guild, which is a team effort to accomplish a mission, versus these guilds, which were basically capital providers to allow people to access some NFTs and then mine and then get a share of it. That's perfectly fine. I mean, I think that's a fine thing to do, but it's toxic to the game. Because if you have all these people just playing that game with the intent of just mining the token, what about the gameplay itself, right? So I think any game that had a lot of these capital guilds attached to them, those games were doomed.
Yeah, I mean, Sarah, as a creator of a game as well, I mean, how do you work to try and make sure those guilds don't appear in what you create?
Yeah, so we don't have guilds that have arisen in Alien Worlds. What we do have is communities that have come together. So for example, we have landowners that have collectively created reward mechanisms on top of what we provide, for example, mining competitions, leaderboards. There isn't an economic model there that's akin to what you're describing where there's an NFT rental model. I think that self-organization of players into units is a wonderful thing. That's teams, and in fact, our DAO structure gives a formal way for that to happen, so our DAOs compete with each other within the game itself. NFT rental is really a consequence of the fact that NFT prices got so high. And I agree that, yeah, it's indicative of a system in which there's probably a one-way outflow of the token, and people are trying to capture as much of that as they can. What's really important in these systems is that there's a closed loop of tokenomics, so that people, are, yes, playing to earn, but then they're using what they've earned in order to continue to play or to take a more strategic stake within the game, which is how we've designed our system where you use the fungible token, which you get through mining, back into the DAOs.
Yeah, because it's kind of the idea that if you invite speculation into a game, you inevitably bring in people who aren't into the game and don't want to play the game, but want to make up some money out of it instead. And that's kind of what we've been seeing in the industry so far.
Yeah, and then games like CSGO, #1 skins game, billions and billions in the secondary market in that game. The difference is, though, that there's not a token. It's just a skin, akin to an NFT. This problem goes away if it's just NFTs in the game. When you have a token to mine and that becomes the principal object, that's where I think the gameplay gets compromised. And that's why we need a new method or a new approach to blockchain-based gaming. Other than that,
I think at the end of the day, it's about maintaining, at least from my perspective with Atmos, it's maintaining competitive integrity, right? You want to build a game that is fun to play and is at some point competitive amongst other people who are playing it. And if people just want to play an economic simulator, then ultimately you're breaking that competition piece, or they're only going to play the economic simulator component. And so it's important to, if you do have those things, you separate them in such a way where you are preserving competitive integrity and that there is not a way to level up. But regardless, it really comes down to building games from the ground up that are ready to handle users that are looking for that type of opportunity.
Did you have something you want to add?
yeah. I would just say, for me, the promise of blockchain gaming is to end the hegemony of the app stores, some of the other massive platforms, Tencent, Steam, where they're substantial value extractors, and they compress what you can do. There's very little innovation allowed in any of those platforms because they compromise their business model. So blockchain gaming lets anyone build anything, and therefore you have a lot more variety, a lot more innovation that can happen around games. Apple and Google in their app stores have really strangled that innovation.
Sure, but then how do you kind of get around the issue of discovery, I guess, finding new games to play? Because that's usually what these app stores become.
But look, I started with PC games. PC games always had that issue. And I think you will tell, if you ask any indie game developer, what environment did they like, Flash games and Flash game development or app stores, they'll take Flash games any day because you could be anywhere on the web, right? And figure out a way to get people to come after you. But if you're an app developer, a game in an app store, there's only 20 in the top 20. That's all that's going to be visible unless you are paying millions of dollars a month. So it's great if you're super successful, but if you're a middling developer, you'd rather be on PC than be in an app store.
Yeah. I'd say, crypto is actually a brilliant place for discovery to happen because the community is so vibrant, liquid, they communicate, forums and Discord. This is where the community is finding where they want to be. So it's community where these games arise, where people discover other games. And it's actually where the entrepreneurial innovation happens too. And so if we see some economic models that are less than optimal, I would say that's kind of a price worth paying for the degree of entrepreneurial activity that is happening in these decentralized metaverse environments. And as long as we also see substantive gaming happening too, hopefully created by the community, rather than just the original game creators, then that's the sign of a vibrant ecosystem.
Right.
Yeah, and going back to just William's last point there, right? If we're trying to build this idea of an open, decentralized metaverse, blockchain is the backbone of doing that, and we absolutely need that level of innovation in order to do it.